What is going on, everybody? Welcome back here to the channel. Welcome to part 2 of a week-long preview of this Minnesota Timberwolves series. And I had to bring my guy, the best intro of the game, Jovan Buha of The Athletic, senior NBA reporter for the Lakers, covering the Lakers for The Athletic. Also, obviously, host of the Buha's Block podcast. Go check him out. Does great stuff over on YouTube. I'll include his links in the description down below. Jovan, my guy, welcome and thank you so much for hopping back on for this kind of home and home, if you will.
Yeah, I just said you on my show, and we'll have to have you on soon for some adjustments between game 1 and game 2, or maybe game 2 and game 3. We did that last year, and it's one of my favorite episodes of last season. And I think the Lakers coaching staff might have been listening to us based on some of the adjustments they made after our pod. But good to see you, and thank you for having me.
Took up a little bit longer. Hopefully it doesn't take JJ
a little bit longer. Yeah.
Thanks for saying game 1. After game 1, we saw finally in game 5, like, yes, where was this the rest of the series? Let's actually start there, actually. So JJ Redick, I think, in a lot of ways has completely surpassed expectations. Year 1, 50-win team. They're the 3 seed. First time they've won 50 wins since their 2020 championship run in the bubble. Heading into his first playoff series as a head coach, what are kind of your expectations, if you will, for JJ in his first playoff series?
I have high expectations for JJ in this series and in this postseason. I think he's shown, especially over the second half of the season, that he can game plan at a high level and outthink some of the smartest minds in basketball. I think starting in probably around that run that they went on beginning in like mid-January, just the defensive game plans. I think the offensive organization has been up and down, but like I think generally that there's been a lot of good things offensively. They've been trending in the right direction, and down the stretch here, they've been awesome offensively. So I think there's been a lot of positives with JJ and the coaching staff and them, especially coming into their own in the second half of the season. So I think looking at the fact that this group, for as good as they can be defensively, the fact that they were the best defense in the league for over a quarter of the season, I think is a testament to JJ and the coaching staff. Like, this group has some pretty good defensive pieces, and I think they have a good defensive scheme, but the way that JJ was game planning against the Knicks, against the Warriors, against the Celtics, against the Clippers, like there was some high level game planning in there. So I think he's been doing that with like 2 days to prep. The Denver game plan, not sleeping for 2 days going into that matchup. He's going to have 4 days of practice. He has about a week here to prepare for game 1. So already the preparation has started beginning last night with the Lakers coaching staff. Today, everyone's on a break, but like we know they're not really on a break. And then Tuesday, it's first practice, back at it, and then watching Warriors Grizzlies in that playing game as a team together. So I think the wheels are already spinning for JJ, and I have high expectations for the type of game planning and minutia that he's going to bring to this series.
Yeah, I'm so glad you touched on that. I've been saying that, I think, to anybody that will listen about JJ. I think there's there's obviously some things you can complain about. I think everybody hates their head coach. No, all seriousness. I think I'm glad you touched on that. I think we saw on numerous occasions, especially post January with JJ, that the ability to just, if you give them 2 days, like you said, to really hone in and prepare for a team defensively. Memphis, even like when Memphis was kind of rolling and they were running their unique style of offense, I think they call it like the wheel or whatever. JJ did a great one of the better jobs we had seen at the time at guarding that. Boston back in January when AD was still here. New York, both games, honestly. Denver, obviously. I mean, that's probably the most noteworthy game. And they've had many noteworthy performances defensively. Even a little bit of this AMP performance. I think there's a lot of stuff that's replicable from their February 27th game that we'll get into here. I'm really, really curious to see how JJ adjusts from game to game. That's always like the fun part, I think, seeing these NBA coaches in playoff settings, how they're able to adjust from game 1 to game 2 and vice versa. And that'll probably be the most interesting thing to watch for JJ. Guy that's kind of proven himself to be a good game planner. How does he adjust throughout a given 7-game series? That'd be pretty cool to watch.
Yeah, we don't have the sample size. We don't even have the schedule yet. Like we don't know how many days they're going to be off between, because in the first round, everything's spread out. So often between like game 2 and 3 and 4 and 5, things will be spread out just because they're the travel portion. So I wouldn't be surprised if Lakers play Saturday, maybe they do like Saturday, Monday, and then they don't play again till Thursday and have a couple days off. And then it's maybe like Thursday, Friday Thursday, Saturday is game 3, game 4. And then maybe they don't play again until like Tuesday, game 5, if there's a game 5. So it's always a little bit more spread out. And I think that's a good thing for the coaching staff. And yeah, I mean, I think it's going to be interesting to see. Because I think JJ's had a balance of like trying, and he'll tell us when we ask him certain questions about like trying to like work on what they're trying to work on and develop, and also adjusting within games and like the balance within that of you don't want to overreact, but you also don't want to underreact. And now this is the ultimate test of you have 7 games to figure this out, and within the first half of game 1, you'll have a sense of like where things are at, what adjustments probably need to be made, and which guys look ready for the series, which guys don't. And of course, those things can change game to game, but like I think we'll have a pretty good grasp of like where JJ is at with the game plan, and then maybe some of the tweaks that he has to make.
All right, so the one time that these two teams faced off this season post Luka Doncic trade would be February 27th in crypto. Lakers won that game, but it's kind of hard to watch it looking back now. No Julius Randle, no Rudy Gobert. This is also the game Anthony Edwards gets ejected in the third quarter, if I recall correctly. So there's a lot of stuff to you can kind of ignore. I think specifically looking at the Lakers offense was kind of hard to watch because part of it does really matter because there's no Rudy. You're not going to see, there wasn't as aggressive of drop in that game as you're going to see with Rudy, where it's going to be as much as possible exclusively drop in this series with Rudy on the floor especially. But I still think there were a couple things you could take away. What were some of the things that you found from your rewatch that you think is important to know heading into the series?
Well, I would also mention that this was the game that Rui got injured in. So even like the Lakers were in theory at full strength entering this game, but then Rui got injured. And so even in the second half, they didn't have Rui. And it was a weird, like there was almost some Ewing theory going on with this game, because at the time Ant got ejected, I believe they were down 15-16. Then they go on this run led by Terrence Shannon Jr., and Minnesota is just playing all their young guys, and they're all super fast and explosive and like getting out in transition and pushing on the Lakers. But like, that's not how they play normally. And that's not like what we're going to see in the playoffs. Like those guys are largely on the peripheral of their rotation. They have a clear top 8, similar to the Lakers. And I expect them to largely lean into their top 8. Maybe they'll test out somebody for like the 9th spot, but for the most part, they're a top 8 type of team. In terms of things I took away, some things that I think we'll see are like Ant hunting Luka and Austin. And again, the caveat I always apply is like, just because someone's getting hunted doesn't mean they're a bad defender. It just means if my options are try to attack Austin or Luka off the dribble, or try to attack LeBron or Rui or DFS or Vando or Jackson off the dribble, I'm going to pick Austin and Luka. So there was a bit of wherever Luka or Austin was kind of hiding defensively, whether it was Conley or someone else, that person would come up to screen for Ant, and they were constantly trying to have that switch happen. On the flip side, Lakers did their own hunting with hunting Conley, hunting Naz Reid, getting him switched out. There's one possession on the right wing where they were in an angle pick and roll, got Naz Reid switched on to Luka. Luka just beats him with 2 dribbles to the rim and scores. So like, I think Minnesota is just in a tough spot with their bigs defensively in this series, in my opinion, where just you can't play drop against Luka. I don't think you could play drop against Austin with the way that he's been shooting and playing recently. LeBron, has been a little bit up and down with his shooting since returning from injury, but I think has been trending in the right direction. Like overall, is having a really good shooting season. So I just think if you're going to drop against the Lakers big 3 and like let them walk into pull up threes, I mean, there might be a game or two where they're not making them, but for the most part, I think those are going to be like target practice shots for those guys. And then I also found it very interesting that like Minnesota really has gone away from McDaniels on Luka. And I think that they've acknowledged that like that's just not a good matchup. So that game, it started with actually Jalen Clark on Luka. And then you saw stretches where Ant was on Luka. And occasionally Jaden would pick him up in like a cross match situation, or maybe Nickeil Alexander-Walker as well. But like, I think they've acknowledged that you need a certain level of strength and power and girth against Luka, and guys like McDaniels, Nickeil Alexander-Walker, they're just too slight, and he could create separation. So I think they have a major Luka problem on their hands. I think in going back and watching some of the film from the conference finals, he did whatever he wanted, and it really just came down to like, was he making shots or not? I think
Kyle Anderson was the best Luka defender.
He was, and that was the one guy that like bothered him a little bit. It was able to poke at the ball and cause some turnovers and stuff. But like when it was Ant or Jaden, he was creating looks. But when he got the switches against the bigs, he was creating separation, good looks. So I just think he's going to do the same thing in this series, and they might have to really sell out. But we've seen when teams sell out, Lakers go in their 4-on-3, 3-on-2, actions, and they've gotten much better throughout the course of the season with those. So I just, you got to pick your poison, and it's either let Luka cook you or let the other guys get layups or get open threes, and that's going to be kind of the chess match for Minnesota.
I think the thing that I noticed a lot, and you talked on the picking on Austin and Luka defensively. This kind of plays in exactly what LA wants, because there's so many times where LA, and sometimes it does like bother me how they'll just concede the switch, especially in like some clutch situations, and you could give up some blow bys and things of that nature. But especially in the first quarter, earlier on in the game, the Lakers would just willingly give the switch and aggressively like zone up the weak side of the floor. And I'm going to show heavy gap help and basically force Anthony Edwards to process, and make reads at a high level. But then almost more importantly, count on these other guys to have to make secondary plays, the secondary reads, or just be lights out on catch and shoot threes. And in this game, Minnesota shot 12 for 41 from three. Naz Reid shot 0 for 5 from three. I don't think obviously Naz Reid is not that bad from three, but they were willing to kind of give Naz and Jaden and Nickeil Alexander-Walker, who took 8 threes. I think they'll kind of live with Dante even taking a couple of contested ones over just blow by Ant, or even some of the pull-ups from Ant. I think there was a possession that I have clipped out from the first quarter, I think, where Ant gets a switch on the right side. He tries to attack, going towards the sideline, and Lakers show aggressive help. He kind of does a half spin and goes into a fadeaway, and he hits it. But if you're the Lakers over a 7-game series, great shot. Ant's a 34% pull-up mid-range shooter this season. Hell yeah, that's a much better shot for Ant than the fact that he's a 56% 2-point scorer since the deadline, and the fact that he's been like a 40% 3-point shooter almost all season. Like, the Lakers going to live with those shots, and they're going to live with the Nazes and the Jaden McDaniels, especially. Julius Randle didn't play this game. They're going to live with some of these other guys to have to make decisions off the catch. And it's unfortunate for Minnesota, because I think there's a massive lack of playmaking, and we'll get into like some of the series X factors later on. But there's a massive lack of playmaking. I think that's going to hurt them. And their second best playmaker, I'll say Ant's a better playmaker because of his downhill like creation still. But like, they need Mike Conley on the floor for just anybody else to do something for them. But like in the fourth quarter, like Luka, AR, Braun, they're just going to switch on Mike Conley to death. And there's going to be a problem.
First quarter, I think,
right,
honestly.
Right.
We saw it in the first quarter in the last matchup. The one note I will make with Ant is he is shooting 48% on mid-range jumpers post All-Star break. So he like Ant I think is playing the best basketball of his career right now. I think he's at that level. So like that's the primary thing that scares me from the Lakers side, is just like Ant is just at a really high level right now. But obviously the Lakers have Luka and LeBron to offset that. But if we're looking for like the paths for Minnesota to win or make this like a 7-game series. I think it has to start with Ant being at a certain level. And like, to his credit, I think he is growing into that player and is looking more like being that type of player. But this will be a big test because I think, to your point, like they're going to concede certain switches and force, if he wants to take contested pull-up jumpers in the mid-range or from 3, I think they're going to do a good job just keeping an arm up, not fouling, and allowing him to take those shots, and then zoning up the rest of the floor, making him make reads. Similar thing with Julius, I think, too, like where he might try to switch, and maybe depending on where he's at on the floor, they'll send some doubles or some aggressive help with their shading. But I think they're going to try to make him be a playmaker too. So I think those are the two guys that, like, if those guys aren't combining for like 50 plus points, I think that's a win for the Lakers defense. And I think that's their blueprint to winning this game, this series in like 5.
Yeah. And because you said post deadline, right?
Look, yeah, I'm on MB. Let me post All-Star. Sorry, post All-Star.
Okay. I went post deadline on play-by-play stats. 43% short mid-range shooter since then. On more long range too. This is a little bit further back, so but still, like, this is considerably better. 43% short mid-range, 42% longer mid-range twos, and then he's been almost 70% finisher at the rim while averaging almost 7 rim field goal attempts per game. Like, yeah, like he's been elite. And I don't have a ballot, obviously, but I got so much crap for like giving him first team nod. He's genuinely been one of the 6 best players since February, basically.
Yeah, no, he's strongly in consideration for that. I have a ballot and I'm struggling with that 5th spot. I think that's arguably, I think 5th in MVP, but first team All NBA, there's a little more of a stat because, like, you don't get a recognition for being 5th in MVP necessarily. You do get recognition for being first team All NBA. So that's been the position that's been the hardest for me. Looking at Ant, Steph, LeBron, Donovan Mitchell, Evan Mobley. I think those are the 5 guys in consideration for me.
All right, so let's go here. Let's go to some more specific things. So let's start with Minnesota. Jovan, what would be your biggest Minnesota question mark heading into this series?
How do they fare in close games? They have been one of the worst crunch time teams in the NBA this season. I believe they're 23rd in net rating, and it's been a little better since the All-Star break. I think that they're up to about 15th or so right there at league average. But if you look at turnover rate, you look at true shooting, they have struggled in both regards. So they're turning the ball over a lot. They are not making shots. Those are typically 2 bad things to happen in crunch time for you. And then looking at the Lakers specifically, Lakers offense has been about 11 points per 100 possessions better than Minnesota's in the clutch. And their defense has been about 1 point per 100 possessions better. So just looking at that, like the Lakers, I trust if it's a clutch game and there's 4 minutes left and Lakers are up by 3, I would trust the decision making and the ability to extract value out of every possession from Luka and LeBron, and even to a lesser extent Austin. Although maybe even to a more of an extent based on how he's performed down the stretch of some of these games. But like, of course, in a playoff setting, I think the ball will still go through LeBron and Luka. Comparing that to Ant and Julius and like whatever Minnesota's doing offensively, I have much more confidence in the Lakers. So even if Minnesota can like execute their game plan and keep things close for 3.5 quarters, I think more often than not, if there are a bunch of close games to open this series, I trust the Lakers to execute and win those. So that's kind of the thing for me, is like, how does Minnesota navigate that? Because I think that's a clear advantage for the Lakers. And it might be Minnesota has to win some of these games if they are going to win the series or make it a long series by 15, 20 plus points to really like put the Lakers away. Because I think if it's close, I trust the Lakers side in terms of executing more.
Yeah, and just to further expand upon that a little bit, because that was that was my biggest question, so I'll divert and pick a different one. But just to add on to that point, like I think Ant going a little bit further back to the leap he's kind of made post February, we'll just call it. I think he's also made a little bit of a leap as a playmaker, but I still don't think it's good enough in a playoff setting to where I can say, yep, all right, you have my full trust or whatever. I think you can just put this team's offense on your back entirely, because I think down the stretch, they're going to have to play lineups where you want to protect the rim. You want to make Luka's life as hard as possible. And I think down the stretch, they're going to play at least 2 to 3 potential guys that, going back to the zoning up argument for LA defensively, where they'll be able to effectively zone up away from the ball and force Ant to see several bodies down the stretch. And can Nickeil Alexander-Walker and Julius Randle and can Rudy be effective in some aspect? So yeah, I just really, really think they don't have enough playmaking, and that's even the bit. I think that's even the more important piece to go along with your argument about their lack of high end playoff execution down the stretch. For me, I'll go. I just don't think they have enough, capable point of attack guys. I think that's their biggest question mark. How do you actually defend Luka, Bron, and AR in this series effectively? Because I've seen a lot of potential matchup ideas for Minnesota heading into this series, and there's to a certain extent a lot some matchup concerns for LA too. But I think LA and how they play defense, there's way easier ways around that. And honestly, the concerns for LA are just going to be like a size thing, if anything. But they're still one of the more bigger teams of the league. Like, you can't even say small ball when you talk about the Lakers. It's more so just a non-traditional center lineup.
So I call it centerless basketball because there's no center out there, but they're not small.
Yeah. That's really what it would be. Whereas for Minnesota, they have good defenders. Like, I think Nickeil Alexander-Walker is a good defender. I think Ant in a vacuum, especially in an on-ball scenario, is a pretty good defensive player. I think he gets lost away from the action a lot. Rudy's obviously an elite rim protector still. Jaden McDaniels is a really, really good defender. And I put a tweet out about a week ago saying, yeah, so who you guys are, ask me anything. And one of the questions was top 3 Luka defenders. Oh, that's a cool question. And the amount of people that said Jaden McDaniels was a good Luka defender, I think is crazy. He is not a good Luka defender at all. And conference final showed it.
They stopped putting him on Luka.
Yeah. And then you can't put Ant on him because that's just going to wear Ant out. And I think Ant also kind of falls into a similar boat. I think Ant's stronger, but I just think over a 48-game sample of him navigating Luka ball screens the entire game or having to guard Luka in isolation, Ant's a little handsy and a little overreactive at times too defensively. So Luka get him in foul trouble. I think that's a disaster waiting to happen for Minnesota. So you take probably your 2 best starting perimeter defenders out of the equation. Okay, so now my other 3 options, we're just talking about Luka, is Mike Conley, Julius Randle, and Rudy Gobert. And Julius Randle can't navigate screens, and Mike Conley's too small. So they're going to, just by nature, unless they're going to make some lineup shift and go Nickeil Alexander-Walker in the starting 5. But again, it kind of runs back to the same point you were talking about earlier. Like, they just don't have enough size and really like muscle on them to be able to guard Luka. And then, okay, cool, we stick our best defender on. Now you still have to guard Bron. Now you still have to guard Austin Reeves. I think the Rudy thing will be fine defensively, actually, unless the Lakers can successfully just space them out and their 5s like Rui and DFS, though the acting 5 men can just pick and pop and consistently hit those 3s. Or Jackson Hayes can be playable for 20 minutes. We talked on your pod that Jackson Hayes has kind of regressed back to the mean, and that was just a really, really, really good month and a half. If he can kind of somewhat itch back up to that, where no, he could play 18 to 20 minutes and be that vertical threat, and then your secondary options, Rui pick and pop, DFS pick and pop, Bron pick and pop even. I think there's a lot of problems that Minnesota can run into defensively, actually, because they don't have good options for the Lakers' 3 best players.
I agree. I think so. I don't want to spoil my series X factor, and so I'm going to leave part of the big dynamic with Minnesota until a little bit later. But to your point, I've been trying to think about the matchups, and it's like, okay, so if we just take it at face value in terms of like the projected starting lineups that these 2 teams prefer to start with, if you're starting Conley, you kind of have to put him on Austin. You could try him on Rui and almost goad the Lakers into like smash mouth basketball of okay, let's get a bunch of deep seals and post ups for Rui, but like he will punish Mike Conley. Maybe you can shade over with Rudy and then kind of like zone that up and
but then they'll just
try
turn
to
Rui
prevent the
into a
lob.
screener.
But yes, there's other ways for the Lakers to counter that. So I think you kind of have to start Mike Conley on Austin. Then I think you probably have to go Rudy on Jackson. And then the other three matchups you could get a little bit creative with. To your point, between the other three, I would probably start Ant on Luka. The problem is it is going to sap his legs, but that's going back to game 5, which I think is an informative game in that series because they're down 3-1. They've tried a bunch of stuff. What are they doing? They're guarding Luka with Ant, and they have Jaden McDaniels on Kyrie. So I think looking at that, maybe you start Ant on Luka, and then you kind of have two options there where you can go Jaden on LeBron and just hope to pressure him and take away any dribbling and just ball pressure him. But then it's I guess Julius on Rui.
I would actually,
or you could put Julius on LeBron, which we did see them do a little bit in the regular season. And then maybe you kind of roam off Rui a little bit, which is dangerous, but like you don't have a lot of great options. So maybe you're kind of using McDaniels as like a free safety and like he's monitoring where Rui is, but like he is trying to wreak havoc as a help defender. It's tough. I think another thing that would be interesting from their perspective would be, do you just put McDaniels on Austin, similar to how they put McDaniels on Kyrie, and you almost just say, okay, we kind of know we're going to concede some things with Luka and LeBron. There's only so much we could do with those two guys, but let's try to take out Austin, and we're going to put a 6'8", 6'9", rangy, all defense caliber guy on him. Like on paper, that McDaniels is like, if I was designing a defender to disrupt Austin, it would be Jaden McDaniels. Like I think that would be a tough matchup for him. So it's a long, rangy, athletic guy. Let's try to take out Austin.
Navigate screens really, really well.
Hope like Julius on LeBron and Ant on Luka, like you can kind of get by in those situations. And then, of course, if Austin's doing a 2-man action with one of those two, you're switching McDaniels, and like that's better than switching Conley or switching a big. So that's, I guess, maybe, but like I don't love either one of those options. And that's where I just come back to, like, I think the Lakers have a little bit more optionality and matchups I like better defensively and kind of things they could do. Whereas the Wolves might have like more high-end top defensive talent, especially with McDaniels and Gobert. But we've seen the movie before of Luka in drop coverage against those two specific guys, just cooking them and them having no answer against him. So I just don't know. Like, I mean, Minnesota could try the same thing again, but I think we're going to see the same result. And now you're dealing with LeBron and Austin and not just Kyrie. And I think LeBron is playing, overall this season has been at a higher level than Kyrie was last season. So I don't really know what Minnesota does defensively. I mean, maybe that's the question, is like, what the hell does Minnesota do defensively against these guys?
I think that, I don't think when we talk about Luka attacking and drop, I don't think it would be the lot like last year with Dallas. They had the lob threat and the verticality with Gafford and Lively, which kind of made Rudy's job a lot harder. I think this year it would be more so the popping into space with their other guys.
Although they still have Jackson as depending on, but it's going to be, and I think a big part too will be Luka's 2-point shooting. And we've seen that return more recently against OKC and Dallas, but he's going to need, like, go back and watching some of the film from the conference finals. It was like he was able to get downhill, get into the crevices, get into the middle part of the floor and hit those runners, floaters, or get someone on his hip, then kind of bump them, create that separation, hit some like step back fadeaways in the middle of the floor. So I think he's going to need to be in that bag in this series, because those are the shots that you're going to get. It was not as much getting to the rim because of just Rudy and how he protects the rim. But he's going to be able to need to hit those mid-range, like in the paint, not at the rim 2-pointers. So I think that's kind of another like mini swing factor.
All right. So what'll be your biggest Lakers question?
think how they guard Ant to me is going to just be the thing, because I think there's a couple ways you could go about it. I think there's the way that the Lakers went about it in the last matchup, and the way that they've tended to defend these types of players, where you concede the switch and then you're zoning up, and you are forcing them to make plays. You're forcing other guys to beat you. I wonder if they mix in some doubling and some blitzing, and maybe on certain spots of the floor, or just like certain offensive partners with him out there that they want to test. Maybe you mix in some more aggressive coverages, but then you mix in those aggressive coverages, and now all of a sudden you're giving Minnesota an advantage, a 4-on-3, a 3-on-2, etc. So I think to some extent, like how risky and maybe how like risk averse they are trying to defend, because we know what the Lakers, a big thing has been their team defense. And for as good as some of the guys can be individually, their big thing is they want to maintain their shell defense. They want to keep you in front of them. And that's partly why they concede the switches, is because they're willing to bet we would rather concede a switch and give you a contested jumper with the on-ball guy, or force you into help, rather than try to play coverage, try to double, then we got to rotate now. And so a lot of times when you're playing 3-on-2, 4-on-3 as the defense, it can sometimes come down to like a speed athleticism thing, in terms of, can you rotate out? Can you make a play on a guy driving, or like, can you shoot the gap on a 2-on-1 or whatever? And the Lakers are at an athleticism and speed disadvantage in most matchups. Like, that's kind of the weird thing with their small ball, is it's a lot more bully ball power small ball rather than like speed athleticism small ball. So I think for them, they want to limit the advantages created for Minnesota's offense and them having to be in those scenarios. So I think they want to stay within their shell, pack the paint to an extent, and then rotate out from that. But Ant might just be such a good over the top shot maker that he can target, okay, bring Gabe into the action, okay, bring Austin into the action, okay, even bring Luka, and let me try to beat Luka off the dribble, create some separation against him, and then force the Lakers' hand to an extent of, like, if Ant is just cooking and the first 2 games of the series he drops 34 and 37 and it's a 1-1 series, now as the Lakers, I think you have to potentially look at like how you're guarding him and make some adjustments. So I think in some ways, like, how they defend Ant and how aggressive or passive they want to be in that decision making can affect the overall kind of outcome of this series. So I keep wanting to say season. So I think that to me is the interesting thing of just like,
right.
Like, I think we've seen a little bit more of a conservative approach from the Lakers in the regular season, and I wonder how, again, if Ant goes off for a couple of big games to start the series, does JJ like counter with a bit more of an aggressive coverage, and then it becomes like, we're going to dare Minnesota's role players to just make shots and live with the results. And I think there will be an element of that overall, but like I do think to some extent it is going to be like, we'll live with Ant contested jumpers, but if he makes enough of them, do they bend off that principle, or do they maintain it? And if they lose somehow, it's just like, well, shit, and went supernova for 4 games, and like there's just nothing you could do about it other than changing your coverage.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really, really good point. For me, I think the biggest Lakers question, and this honestly can turn this, and not trying to show my hand here, this can make this go from a long series to like, yeah, this is over relatively quickly. It is, can the Lakers centerless basketball, or their centerless lineup, can they match Minnesota's size when they do so, specifically on the offensive glass? Because I think when they go small, that group is really freaking good. The group is a plus 19.4 net rating with the depth lineup, if you're the Lakers version of the depth lineup, which is Luka, AR, Dorian Finney-Smith, Rui, LeBron. That's been their best lineup since the trade, essentially. But Minnesota, with any lineup essentially with Rudy Gobert on the floor, are one of the better offensive rebounding teams in the league. They rebound, like, offensive rebound 30% of their missed shots. And some of their top lineups, we look at 35, 36, 37%, like lineup that's played 221 possessions. This is, by the way, plus 30, plus 29 net rating per clean the glass. Mike Conley, Ant, Jaden McDaniels, Naz Reid, Rudy Gobert, like I said, plus 29. They recover 35% of their missed shots. Like those are numbers that I don't think the Lakers have consistently. Even if you go back to this first game, there were a couple possessions where I want to say it's Jalen Clark just out hustles some of the Lakers role players like a Rui or like a Luka because he's just faster than them. That's where the athleticism kind of comes in. And I don't have the data in front of me on their crashing talent. I think that's like a B-ball index metric.
I think so, yeah.
But it feels noticeable watching them against LA, at least going back and focusing on the first quarter. If the Lakers are able to hold them and be able to match their size on the for the Lakers on the defensive glass, because with Jackson Hayes actually their starting unit, Luka, AR, Rui, Braun, Hayes, they hold teams only at 18% offensive rebounding percentage, which is really, really good with Hayes on the floor. And that's kind of where like the can Jackson Hayes be playable argument comes into the equation. But if that depth lineup or the centerless basketball lineup can hold their ground on the defensive glass, then I think that's where we get a series, like I said, where this is over relatively quickly. Because okay, Ant can go supernova, but they're gonna miss shots eventually. And if you're able to to keep them to one shot, and you're able to also space them out on your end of the floor, that's where I just think Minnesota's out of schematic counters at that point. I think one of the biggest keys for Minnesota to win this series is going to be, can we be the superior athletic team and can Ant kind of carry us with the shot making? I think those are going to be the two keys. I'm glad you touched on that for LA's side of things, like what their biggest question is, because I think it's that, and I also think it's this: be able to play small, but also be able to dominate the defensive glass. I think that'd be a really big key.
As Pat Riley said, no rebounds, no rings, right? Like
yeah.
that's the key here. I don't want to. I have my series question or X factor that I want to leave for the end, but it is adjacent to this, so I will be giving you my perspective on this toward the end of the show.
Yeah, for sure. All right, who is the Lakers? We'll go back. We'll do Minnesota again. Who is Minnesota's biggest player-wise, biggest X factor for the series?
I think you could look at really anyone in their supporting cast in like kind of their shooting, but I will specifically look at Naz Reid because I think one thing, and I am going to spoil my series X factor a little bit here, but like one thing we talked about on my show when we were looking at our matchup rankings for the Lakers and like how a potential Lakers Wolves series would go is I don't know if the Wolves can play two bigs against the Lakers in like big moments. And when just thinking about like which guys make sense and which guys could hang against the Lakers death lineup, I think there's a real question there between Naz Reid and Julius Randle. And I think arguably the best version of Naz Reid, I think is a higher level defensive player than Julius Randle, and is also a floor spacing, pick and pop, catch and shoot nightmare for teams, but when he can get hot from deep. And then he also just plays with a certain verve, and like you'll see him run from the 3-point line and get a tip dunk or something. And like he just plays with a certain physicality and energy that I think is contagious and important. So I think when looking at kind of like how the Wolves are going to approach this, I assume they're going to try to stay as big as possible. And Naz is the guy who is kind of the connecting piece there, where he can play with Julius, he can play with Rudy, and he can play by himself. And I think he's like the most versatile of those three bigs. So I just think whenever the series ends, however many games it is, and I know we will make that prediction, I think the Naz minutes are going to be a big swing factor. And like, I think the best version of the Wolves, they're going to win the Naz minutes. And if this is a short series, the Lakers will find a way to counter that and win those. So I just view him. He's also to look at some of their recent shooting. So the Wolves have been shooting at a really high level. That's been one of the second half developments for them is just the 3-point shooting, like going through the rotation. Mike, this is all post All-Star break. Mike Conley, 46% on threes. Dante DiVincenzo, 45% on threes. Julius Randle, 40%. Nickeil Alexander-Walker, 36, Ant, 35. The two guys that are the shakiest in this, Nas is just under 33, and Jaden McDaniels is 31. So I was between Nas and Jaden McDaniels, but I think if Nas and like in theory his switchability onto some of the Lakers perimeter guys and just his 3-point shooting and like I just think he fits this series a little bit more than Rudy does, unless Rudy just goes berserk on the offensive glass. I think Nas is the guy that I look at like if Rudy gets played off the floor or played into a smaller role. I don't think he's going to be played off the floor entirely, but maybe to like a slightly smaller role. Maybe Julius is struggling with his decision making with the way the Lakers are defending him. I think Nas is the one guy that's like, if you just go Ant and 4 shooters, Nas can be out there in that lineup and like make some sense. And if he is the antidote to Rui or DFS as like a pick and pop big, I think Minnesota has a shot to make this a real series. So I view Nas for me as like the guy that you can make a case for Jaden, Dante, like I think those strong cases for all of their supporting cast. But if Nas can hold up, especially defensively, I think it does change the complexion of the series a bit.
Yeah, absolutely. I think Nas was one of the guys that did consider for this criteria, if you will. For me, I went Julius Randle, and this is partially spoiling my my overall series X factor or the deciding factor, if you want to call it that. I think it's Julius Randle because I think Julius Randle is going to be relied upon a lot as a mismatch hunter. Something I think they missed in the February 27th game, because having that legitimate mismatch hunter where the Lakers are going to switch a lot, I think Randle can provide a wrinkle potentially to their offense when the Lakers are going to be switching and zoning up away from the ball. If he's able to just attack some of these switches and put pressure on the interior for the Lakers, but more importantly, be able to make decisions out of that. And that's like the biggest thing. It goes back to the overall like big question about Minnesota that you highlighted, and I talked about as well, with their clutch offense, with their playmaking in general. Can these other guys make secondary decisions and make plays off the catch, or make plays when the Lakers do rotate over because you force them in a rotation? And then can Julius Randle hit, catch, and shoot threes? So far this season, on when you've gotten a contest per Synergy, he is a 29% guarded catch and shoot 3-point shooter. So we can show, and I thought the Lakers, especially early in the most recent Timberwolves game, did a good job of aggressively loading over. Ant skips the ball out where they're on the catch, and we're going to live with the shot. So that's a win for the Lakers. We're going to live with the 1 and 5 or 1.5 and 5 threes that you're going to take, that you make those 1.5 or whatever. We're going to live with that, and we're going to focus on zoning up away from the ball and making Ant's life miserable. So Randle's ability to be a mismatch hunter, put pressure on the rim. He's actually a really good post-up player, and this kind of goes into my point about him as a mismatch creator. He's in the 78th percentile in scoring possessions on post-ups this season. And then he also has some size to make things a little bit interesting in terms of like he can just somewhat match LeBron's strength in isolation situations or maybe in post-up scenarios. So I think that will be one of the biggest keys. If Randle can hold his own to a certain extent defensively while also being a reliable enough mismatch hunter and secondary offensive creator, because if it's like the Anthony Edwards show and I'm bringing extras along with me, but the main character, actually the entire cast is Anthony Edwards, but I have extras along with me, then this is, I think, a pretty quick series.
I think a way I kind of look at this, and I think we touched on this as well on my my matchup show, is like I think we know who the clear top 3 players in the series are in some order. Like I would tentatively probably put it at least based on I don't know. It's tough. I think Luka's number 1, and then Ant versus LeBron is tough between 2 and 3 there. Like playoff LeBron is a monster. I think Anto is going to have a certain load, so like maybe his numbers will be a little bit better overall, just because he's the primary guy. But we'll see. But there's a clear top 3. I think Randle versus Austin for number 4 is a big swing. That's like another X factor within all of this, because if Austin is the 4th best player in this series and the Lakers have 3 of the top 4 players, that's where this is a 4 or 5 game series. If Julius Randle can outplay Austin and clearly be the number 4, and Austin's the number 5, and I know it could be close where Julius is just like a little bit better, but like if he's like decidedly better and there's a clear gap there between the top 3, then Julius Randle's on like his own tier, then Austin's on the next tier. That's where I think Minnesota has the capability to push this to 6 or 7, or maybe even win it. So I think Julius, to your point, is a big swing factor of like, he needs to be a true like all-star level number 2. Otherwise, I just don't think they have enough top end firepower.
All right, who is your biggest X factor for the Lakers?
It's the guy who I think is going to be tasked with trying to stop Julius Randle in Rui Hachimura. I think Rui, to me, on balance, has been the Lakers' 4th best player this season, and I think we've seen a growth in consistency, but particularly on the defensive end. I think Rui has been much better on the defensive end. All the lineup data backs it up. It's been interesting to see like the starting group with Rui versus starting group with DFS has been better with Rui, and the defense has been better with Rui. He's been instrumental in the small ball looks. We saw him guarding Cat, him guarding Jokic. I assume he'll get the start on Randle, and he's defended him well in the past, both earlier this season and also in previous seasons in New York. So I think Rui has an important defensive job of like, how can he hold up one-on-one against Randle and shift him to certain spots of the floor. And then 2, he's going to get a lot of open threes and cuts and like different, like he's going to be the guy that they cheat off of sometimes, just because the other 3 guys are going to be LeBron, Luka, and Austin. So if Rui can make open threes, if he can have timely cuts and like not get blocked at the rim or contested and alters, around the basket from Rudy or whoever, just their rim protection. That's where I think the Lakers, again, if he could be the 6th best player in the series, right? Like we could keep kind of playing this game, but like Rui, I think is just a guy who, like, when he shows up, the Lakers are really hard to beat. When he doesn't, they're a little bit more vulnerable. And looking at his playoff history, I think he's had 2 really good series against Memphis and Denver in the 2023 conference finals. I think he's had 1 okay series against Golden State in the 2023 semifinals. And I think he's had 1 atrocious series against Denver last year in the first round, where I did not think he was good on either side of the ball. And really, because of how bad D'Lo was and how much attention was on that, I think Rui kind of skated a bit under the radar in terms of how detrimental he was in that series. So that's also the most recent series. But I do think with the growth he's shown this season, I trust Rui. I believe in Rui. I think he's going to have a good series. But if Julius is just bully balling him around the court, and he's missing open threes, and he's starting to miss his shots around the rim, and he kind of becomes a pumpkin, I think the Lakers are in trouble. Then it becomes like, can DFS step up and do some of these things? Can Jackson step up? And like, you're kind of putting that responsibility lower on the totem pole. So I think Rui, to me, is like, if he's on his A game or even like B plus game, the Lakers are really, really tough to beat. If he's anything lower than that, I think all of a sudden that changes the complexion of the series.
Man, I was, really hoping we were able to just dodge each other the entire show. I also had Rui Hachimura as my biggest X factor. One of my biggest pet peeves with Rui at the beginning of the season, basically pre-Luka trade, because I think the Lakers made just a structural like identity shift offensively. This is my biggest pet peeve with Rui, because I kind of came off as a Rui hater. I thought Rui was fine. But everybody's biggest, statement to me was like, Sean, why are you hating on Rui, man? He's a really, really good shooter. Like, guys, he takes 3 threes a game. Nobody cares that he shoots 40% on 3 threes. I'm going to live with that. And really the biggest thing is you just have no room for like outlier shooting performance, because you're only shooting 3 threes a night. Post or in his last 20 games, which basically said February 1st, actually, because he had that stint where he missed time, obviously. Rui's averaging 14.5 points, almost 5 rebounds a game, nearly 65% true shooting percentage. But in this stretch, also, he's shooting over 5 threes a game and shooting 40% from 3. So now you leave the door open for it. I mean, he'll have like a random bad shooting night, like against Golden State early in February, shot 1 for 5 from 3, shot 1 for 8 against Charlotte right after the All-Star break, 1 for 4, had a cut up 1 for 6 against Houston a couple weeks ago. Not the most recent Houston game, but he'll have, a couple of these games where, yes, the shot isn't falling. But you'll have a game where he goes 4 for 4 against Indiana, or 4 for 9 against Denver, or 3 for 5 against Utah, et cetera, et cetera. You just leave the door open for possibilities to have one of these hot shooting nights. And now the defense has to react to you even more. You can play off the catch, be athletic at the rim, or that just opens up more space for Luka, Bron, and Austin to drive because now they're worried about you. So for that reason alone, his ability to play off the catch, I think, will be important. If they do go Conley or like a DiVincenzo, even I can see Minnesota kind of sizing down and trying to hide one of these guards, smaller guards that they want to protect defensively and throw them on Rui. I wouldn't be surprised even if they got to a point where they said, look, we're going to put Ant on Rui and kind of let him hide there defensively even. But that's where Rui has to get involved as a cutter and start to crash the glass a little bit more, because that's where I think you can kind of poke at some of Ant's defensive weaknesses. And then basically just everything you said defensively with Rui. I think Rui's size and versatility defensively has been a big part of why they've been able to keep that lineup on the floor as consistently as they have been post-Luka trade. And it's like they're able to throw him. I think when they go small, I think they throw him on Rudy, honestly. Or when they are in their traditional starting five, I think they will throw him on Julius Randle and let Bron probably guard Jaden McDaniels. Luka with Conley or Luka on Jaden McDaniels?
So it's actually a good question because they, in the last matchup, they put Rui on Ant, but
yeah,
I think Rui's probably going to draw. I guess you could put LeBron on Randall, but that is a lot to ask him on both sides of the ball. So I think maybe you go on Randall, LeBron and McDaniels, Austin on Ant. And we've seen Austin get deployed on like a Shea or someone like that.
And you're switching anyway. So
you're switching anyway. And then, I guess Luka's on Conley and is more of a helper in that case. So you got to be careful with closeouts and just he's a really good shooter. And then Jackson on Rudy. But that is Lakers have to make a decision there because I guess you could technically go LeBron on Randall, Rui on Ant, Austin on Conley, and Luka on McDaniels. That's another way.
I think that's the way you like best utilize Luka as a helper too, because if Luka's helping off of McDaniels, okay, Jaden, if you want to hit 5 tonight, oh well, we just got to live with that. Conley probably could do that, or DiVincenzo when DiVincenzo checks in. So I think I like that option slightly better. Yeah.
The one thing is you're asking a lot from LeBron defensively with having like Randall just is like he's a rhino out there. He just wants like he's just gonna battery ram you in the chest like on every possession. So that is a lot for like, I mean, and look, we know LeBron could do that. We've seen him do that at different points this season where he's had some games where he's like, I'm going to lock in a little bit more defensively and take a step back offensively. So maybe this series calls for that. It's also playoff LeBron, so we know he could do a little bit more on both sides because that's just how he's wired. So it'll be interesting. They have options, but again, I kind of like their options more than the Wolves defensively.
All right, so last thing before we get to our series prediction. What is the overall series deciding factor? Like, what is this series, in your opinion, going to come down to at the end of the day?
Which style wins, big versus small? And I know, with the caveat that small Lakers are not actually small, but I think the biggest thing here is these two teams, there are some similarities in terms of they both want to overpower you. They want to overwhelm you. They play a power style of basketball where they are used to having certain physical advantages over their opponents from like a strength size perspective. With the Lakers, they do it without a center. With the Wolves, they do it with one of the biggest centers in the league, and then just this monstrous trio of bigs who one is really tall, the other two are both really strong and physical. I think that there's two elements to this, where one is like just the literal, like, can either side get the other one to make an adjustment? So for the Lakers, I think that would look like less Rudy, potentially them going to Nas versus Julius and like playing one big, or just Rudy gets a little bit neutralized and now it's a lot more Nas and Julius. I think that's a win for the Lakers.
Mhm.
The flip side would be Rudy, Nas, Julius. They're just overpowering the Lakers in the paint, and they feel like they have to play Jackson more. And it's just like a pure size thing of Jackson needs to be playing like 30 minutes a night in this series. And while the theoretical ceiling of Jackson could be a good thing, I think we've seen the Lakers play their best centerless, like DFS Rui at the 5, picking and popping, spacing the floor. It's like impossible to guard. And I still think that's like their best version. So there's like the literal, like, does either side get the other one to make a big adjustment in terms of how they attack it? And then I think there's just like the smaller, just like nightly battle of it could be a night like game 1 could be, okay, Lakers go small, they outplay Minnesota. Game 2, Minnesota's like a little bit better with their principles. They overpower the Lakers in game 2. And it's like, it could kind of be a game to game thing where one of these two sides is winning. But I almost view it like a war where it's just like two completely different, like, tactical strategies. And one of the two is going to win on a nightly basis. And like, I kind of think, whichever one wins that is going to win the series. And like, so I think if we go to like, if we say the series is going at least 6 and it's game 6, 5:45 left in the fourth quarter, who are the 5 guys out there on both sides? And like, if you tell me the 5-man lineup for each side, I will tell you who I think is up 3-2 in that series and like how the series is probably going. So I think the Lakers kind of have to play the Wolves size off the floor. Otherwise, I think that the Wolves are going to have a certain physical advantage that like drags this out. But the flip side is, if the Wolves, like, if they could do that, I think this is a real series. If they can't, I think the Lakers win. But I'll look at OKC, Houston, Memphis, Dallas. All those teams won in double bigs, playing certain centers, and the Lakers attacked them and drop. They played certain guys off the floor. And those teams, by the end of those games, were playing one big or zero bigs. So I think we have a recent sample size of LA winning that battle. I think they will win that battle in this series. But if they don't, that's where I think the door is open for Minnesota to win.
And one other quick thing to add to your point. I went elsewhere, but I do agree with that. I kind of figured one of us was going to go there. So I said, all right, I'm going to trust Jovan to bail me out here and go with it. So appreciate it. I actually think, and let me know what you think. I actually think it would be them going away from Randall over going away from Rudy. I think it would be more Nas Rudy than Nas Randall, or just I think Rudy is so important to their defense. And I think the Lakers can counter the drop by just running their drop beaters, spamming pick and roll, or some of their veer concepts. But on top of that, I think the way that they neutralize Rudy is either doing stuff like that or with the popping into space and spacing them out. This kind of goes into your small versus big and the physicality argument that even I brought up earlier. And I also think that Rudy also gives them such a big advantage on the offensive glass, to where I think, again, they just go away from Randall and maybe get some more shooting and a little more versatility, to where I think they probably trust Nas a little bit more in space than they do with Julius Randle, than Rudy Gobert, to where if they want to go like Luka DFS pick and roll or Luka Rui pick and roll, they might pre-switch the action and let Nas go up and just switch it, and you maintain the defensive advantage. I think that's maybe something we see from Minnesota. Because I think if you take Rudy off, the Lakers can take Rudy off the floor somewhat permanently. That's a series.
The lineup we talked about on the matchup show is like, and I think this could be an effective lineup for Minnesota. Is what if they go like Nas, Jaden, Ant, Dante, and you can switch across 1 through 4 and even 1 through 5 if you really want to. But like, you have at least 4+ defenders out there, all perimeter oriented. You have Ant still, and then you have a couple shaky shooters in Nas and Jaden who can go cold for stretches, but like Na and Dante have been high level shooters all season. That might be like the most like modern lineup they can kind of go to that matches up with the Lakers. I just think if we're looking at the Lakers death lineup versus the Wolves starting lineup, or maybe even just take out Conley, put in Dante or put in Na, fine. Okay. Space the floor, Austin and Rui in the corners. Let's say that he's guarding DFS. He is in Rudy. All right, we're going to have LeBron on the wing, Austin and Rui in the corners, and now it's just high pick and roll, Luka and DFS. DFS is popping, similar to what we saw down the stretch of like the Indiana game, and some of these other, similar to OKC. And it's like, okay, so what are you going to do with Rudy? Are you can pre-switch it? Okay, we're going to run the same act. Like there are ways the Lakers can counter that, and I just. You could bring Randall into the action. Like, I don't know. I think they're going to test Minnesota. And again, Minnesota might just say, screw it. Like, we're going to live with some of these things. We're going to stay big. We think it offsets the disadvantages that we have. But that's like the chess match within it for me of do they stay big? Do they not? And can they go small? And like, they could still win those minutes potentially, like in theory, if those guys are all like hitting shots. Like, we've seen this group get hot before. Them is in Minnesota. So I don't know. I think that to me is going to be the most fascinating thing of like who can force the other one to play more of their style.
Yeah. Last thing here to touch up on your argument. In lineups with Rudy Gobert on the floor this season, they're plus 6.7. They have a 30.2% offensive rebounding rate, and they allow 108 points per 100 possessions. Or they have a 108 defensive rating with Rudy Gobert on the floor. With any lineup with Rudy Gobert off the floor this season, then the numbers go from plus 6.7 net rating to plus 2.8. They obviously have a slightly better offensive rating, but their offensive rebounding rate goes from about 30.5% or whatever to 26%. And then they go from 108 defensive rating to a 116 defensive rating.
So big swing.
Yeah. And there is the particular lineup that I'm looking at with Rudy on the floor that I think actually kind of works to the argument that I'm talking about is Ant, Dante, Jaden McDaniels, Naz Reid, Rudy Gobert. Now this is the thing with the pre-switching. Can Minnesota like consistently execute like on the back line? So they're not the Golden State Warriors where like the backline communication is going to be consistently elite. And we're talking about Ant who would be on that backline, presumably because you're hiding him. Like I think there's just ways around that to your point. I've been hinting at my, series X factor, if you will, for a little while now. I think it's like which team's secondary guys. So for Minnesota, essentially anybody not named Anthony Edwards. And then for the Lakers, you're not like the non-big three guys. I think whichever team secondary players can consistently make plays off the catch, whether that's knock down, your open catch and shoot threes or even hit the contested ones. But really more importantly, be able to make decisions off the catch and make that secondary read or make the secondary pass. More importantly for Minnesota, because I honestly think that LA will just live. I think they will honestly live throughout the series with Ant shooting contested pull-ups. And then if Ant is any of those, and then he has to force the skip out, and Julius and Jaden and Nas and Dante and Nog can all make decisions off the catch and kind of make the Lakers pay in that regard, because then be able to play off the catch and attack closeout to get the Lakers defense to rotate unnecessarily. That might be a bigger swing for Minnesota than Ant just hitting contested twos or even contested threes, because Ant doing that, one, I think that's going to happen regardless to a certain extent. So, okay, cool. You got yourself a game probably, but Minnesota's secondary guys be able to do some of this stuff that I'm talking about can make this somewhat a series, especially if we add some of the elements that we've already talked about. And then even for LA, like Rui, more specifically, be able to attack some of these mismatches. We've talked about them potentially throwing some smaller guards on him, be able to attack mismatches, be able to hit your open catch and shoot opportunities, be able to play off the catch. Dorian and Gabe Vincent actually really, really kind of fills into this spot nicely because he's going to play a lot off of Luka and off of Braun and Austin, even to a certain extent. And Gabe's like the perfect guy to kind of fit into this role of, okay, I'm the guy that will catch it, and be able to make the right play pretty consistently off the catch and, hit the one more, hit the, baseline drive, corner skip out pass, or maybe I hit, drive baseline and hit Braun on the slot cut. I think that stuff from either team can really also, again, for LA, if they dominate this aspect, you're maybe looking at a relatively quick series, or vice versa. If Minnesota's kind of able to prove that their non-Anthony Edwards guys can make decisions off the catch, because that's going to cause the Lakers to change things coverage-wise as well.
I also want to note that this is just something that just popped into my head as we were talking, like going back to, so again, like big picture, it is tough to take away too much from the season series from either side, but Minnesota has basically had the same group for all season.
Mm-hmm.
And going back to those 2 December games, the Lakers had 20 plus turnovers in both of those games. So like that's another thing here with this group of, you talked about the offensive rebounding and the rebounding battle. And like when this group is at their worst defensively, they're not communicating, they're not gang rebounding, that they're allowing putbacks and points in the paint and offensive rebounds and all that. But I think that the flip side is the offensive end, where the Lakers taking care of the ball is going to be a huge thing in this series, because again, as we saw in different personnel, no Luka, but like I thought at points in those matchups, LeBron and Austin struggled with the decision making and the length and the athleticism. And I think Luka might just be the savior, and it doesn't really matter. But like, if those guys can have stretches where they are having 4, 5, 6 turnovers and allowing Minnesota to get 12 plus steals and turning the ball over 18, 20, 22 times, those are the games that I think it's going to be really hard for the Lakers to win, unless they just have superior shot making, which is possible and can happen on any given night, right? But you turn the ball over 20 times, you are leaving a lot on the table from a possession battle. So to some extent, this is now morphing in my head into like the possession battle, I guess, with the turnovers, the offensive rebounding. Like that's going to be its own thing of like, if the Lakers are winning the possession battle or it's close, I just think that they have too much offensive talent where they should win this. If Minnesota is able to create advantages with the offensive rebounding and the perimeter disruption, that's where I think they have a shot.
All right. So I think we did a really good job of kind of highlighting some of the key talking points in this series. Now is prediction time, Jovan. I asked you before the show, how confident were you in your prediction? What is your prediction for Lakers Wolves?
My prediction is Lakers in 6. And I think this is, to me, like I know historically home team, it's typically that team in 5 or that team in 7. And if I had to pick between those two, I would lean more Lakers in 5 than Lakers in 7. However, I think looking at Minnesota's statistical profile throughout the course of the season, they are one of only 4 teams top 10 in offense and defense. The other 3 are OKC, Cleveland, and Boston. On paper, the 3 best teams in the NBA this season, the only 3 teams to win 60 plus games. So Minnesota has been elite on both sides of the ball. They've been playing really good basketball lately. I think they've figured some things out with Ant, with Julius Randle. The shooters have all been shooting well. And I think on paper, if you were like concocting a team that could give the Lakers some trouble in a 7-game series, I'd want the team to be big. I'd want them to have some good perimeter defenders. I'd want them to have some good shooting, and I'd want them to have an apex superstar who could match Luka or LeBron on any given night. Minnesota checks all those boxes. So to me, I do see a path for this being a really tough series and for them potentially even winning it. I don't think the Lakers are like 80-20 favorites in this series. I'd maybe say like 65-35, but because of that, I say Lakers in 6. I think it's a 2-2 series going back to LA for game 5. LA wins a big game 5 and then closes out the series on the road in Minnesota.
I also have Lakers in 6. I kind of see it the same way in terms of how the series ultimately shakes out. I think with this one, I think Minnesota, if they had the capable playmaking or like a real Luka defender, then I think they probably could actually win the series. I think really at the end of the day, it's the fact they cannot execute down the stretch. I think this series they have a lot of close games, and those just don't favor Minnesota. I'm taking the overwhelmingly trustworthy like star power that LA has in Luka, LeBron, and Austin Reeves over Anthony Edwards and crew, honestly. And I don't mean that like in a disrespectful way to Minnesota, but like just there's something to him. And down the stretch in these close games, there's the reliability factor, and I just don't trust any of those guys that Minnesota has. But we've detailed throughout the show, they do a lot of stuff really, really well. They have the switchiness with their wings, and they have the size and the athleticism that can really, really give LA some troubles. And if Luka had a bad rim finishing or like 2-point scoring series, I actually wouldn't be that surprised, because I think, I don't know, it could be interesting. I'm not counting on it, or I mean, I'm definitely not counting. I'm not expecting it, rather, is what I should have said. But it wouldn't necessarily surprise me, especially if like the shooters on the pick and pops aren't really performing, or Hayes isn't a capable lob threat, so where Rudy kind of has to sag off a little bit more to protect the lob. And then honestly, like, can they guard Ant? Like, there are some structural problems that Minnesota presents to LA, but there are just enough problems that LA creates for Minnesota matchup wise, or versatility, like in terms of what you want to do with your scheme. I think Minnesota is very limited to what they want to do defensively. And just from the simple like lineup data I brought up, like you take Rudy Gobert off the floor, you make him somewhat unplayable. Their defense take a significant hit. One of their best attributes is their rim defense and their offensive rebounding ability. And you can play Rudy off the floor, then I just think there's enough issues that are major concerns and like series enders for Minnesota, where, in my opinion, at least, the concerns for LA are more like, okay, this extends the series by a game, if that makes sense. I think the lack of execution, the lack of schematic versatility kind of just makes this like, I think LA is going to win. It's going to take a Herculean effort from Anthony Edwards, I think, to be able to pull this series off.
Yeah, a couple things that I'm interested to, just as we wrap, is like Lakers have not played well, and they've lost 4 straight games in Minnesota, and I feel like that's been one of the places that just this is more anecdotally, but I feel like they have not tended to play as well in Minnesota among various road arenas. Like I feel like I can just recall like multiple 20-point beatdowns there, so I think that's kind of like a little bit of a subplot for me, is like how do they actually fare there specifically. Another thing is like, remember, like this is why I give Minnesota a lot of credit and want to like give them a certain level of respect. Like they made the conference finals last year. Like they had one of the best modern defensive runs we've seen against Phoenix, against Denver, 2 high-level offenses with all-time greats in Kevin Durant and Nikola Jokic. So I do want to give Minnesota a certain level of like, they're legit. I think Chris Finch is a really good coach. I think that I don't know, maybe they go zone. Maybe they go Rudy 2-3 zone. Rudy's in the middle, and like they test the Lakers zone offense, and I think it's gotten better. But like, I think they'll have to come up with some funky stuff, because they can't play it traditionally against the Lakers and expect Luka not to just light them on fire. But I think it's gonna be a fun series. I'm really excited. Like, I'm glad it's not Lakers Warriors. We might get that next round, and we'll have to unpack that then. But it's some new blood with Lakers Timberwolves. They haven't played each other since 2004.
Yeah. Lakers is 6 for both myself and Jovan. Guys, thank you all so much for tuning in here to another episode on the channel. Make sure you hit the like button and subscribe. Go check out all of Jovan's great stuff. I'm sure you guys are already following him on Twitter or X at Jovan Buha. Also, check out his podcast on YouTube, Buha's Block. Oh my God. Buha's Block on YouTube. Go check that out. Jovan, my guy, thank you so much for hopping on. This is a ton of fun as always.
Appreciate you, man. Thank you for having me.
As always, guys, go Lake Show. Catch you guys in the next one. Peace out.